Let's do this. Hi, I'm Gibbon, and this, I guess, is the Arcade Era Power Hour podcast. I can't remember who came up with that name. It wasn't me. But thank you. Thanks a lot. Let's see, where should we begin? I suppose a good place to start in this inaugural episode would be, what is DK Girder? And, dear listener, I would respond with dkgirder.com is a site I set up that is dedicated to the arcade version of Donkey Kong, as opposed to the Donkey Kong Country iteration. There's plenty of fan sites already for the Donkey Kong Country version and its spin-offs, DK Vine being primary among them. There's also DKC Atlas and various others. But the arcade game and its family of related titles doesn't have a whole lot of sites. There's a handful that are dedicated to sort of cataloging the paraphernalia of the time, and there's the Donkey Kong forums, which is an arcade DK forum, but is primarily dedicated to like the competition aspect, the high score, and the technique, which is some really fascinating stuff, but isn't really what DK Girder covers. So DK Girder is more concerned with like the world and I'm not going to say lore, but just sort of like the story and the non-gameplay aspects, really. The building connections. Sort of like what DK Vine does with the rare titles and I guess now the retro and Platonic and whatnot titles, but with the arcade games and EAD and NST games and stuff. So yeah, we cover the arcade games and their lineage, like the Game & Watch titles, and then the Mario vs. Donkey Kong franchise. Also cover sort of the spin-offs and related titles, like Ice Climber and the original Mario Bros. Pre-Super Nintendo, pre-Super Mario Bros. Basically. And also related titles like Congo Bongo, which was a Sega arcade game, but has some interesting lineage related to Donkey Kong. Also covered is Donkey Kong Jungle Beat and its arcade sequels, and I might be mistaken, but I believe DK Girder might actually have the most Jungle Beat coverage at the moment. Just because of the work I did on translating the guide and putting that up on the internet. Because there's just not a whole lot of Jungle Beat stuff out there, apparently. But yeah. Also, a certain amount of pre-Super Mario Bros. Stuff for Mario, not just Mario Bros., but also his like Game & Watch titles and some of the other arcade games and NES games he showed up in. He and Pauline, like Pinball or Ladies Golf, which I'll talk about before the end of this podcast. And then also recently we expanded the scope to cover the Saberwolf franchise, starting back on the ZSX and going up to, I guess, the GBA game in the mid-2000s, since he hasn't really shown up much since then. Just in the spirit of pre-Rare games that Rare built on, and I guess technically that's still Rare, but yeah. But also, in addition to that, I guess you could call it the spiritual predecessor to Banjo-Kazooie, Crystal Castles, which, as far as I understand, is completely coincidental, but stars a bear fighting a green-tinged Tilda named witch as he goes through castles collecting honey. It's a rollerball. What do you call it? Trackball. There you go. Trackball controlled arcade game from back in the day. It's actually kind of interesting to play. But yeah, as I said, set this up because I was just kind of, there's not a whole lot of places for it on the internet. Nowhere to really talk about it. Like the DK Vine forums are great, but I've only really got like the one little corner that is the arcade era appreciation topic I set up that's really dedicated to talking about this sort of thing, since like the site's great, but it's just not their purview to talk about the arcade and related titles. So I realize that's a little ironic because I don't actually have a forum up on DK Girder, but I do intend to put one up. I've been looking into it, looking into my options there. I want to redo the CSS on the website first. As it turns out, I did not do the most intelligent of CSS designs when I was first throwing the site up. I could have made some better decisions there, but hey, it's a learning experience. I'm having fun with it. So anyway, now that I've got sort of the introductions out of the way, let's cover some topics of discussion on this one-man show. First up, earlier in the month, or I guess last month at this point, we had Donkey Kong's 35th anniversary. No, that was earlier this month. Yeah, that was back on the 9th. 35th anniversary of Donkey Kong releasing back in 1981. Yeah, so that's kind of a big event. 35 years of Donkey Kong. I guess Nintendo as we know it. They weren't really on the map before this. Nintendo did, of course, a spectacular celebration of nothing. But the internet in general was pretty hip about it. Lots of stuff on Twitter and Facebook and Tumblr and lots of gaming news sites all over the place. So it was cool to see a lot of outpouring just from everybody on that. Later on in the month, we had another anniversary. It was the 33rd anniversary of Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. being released on the Famicom for home audiences. So that's also pretty cool. So that's been going on for a while. So yeah, the original Donkey Kong. A lot of people know that it was originally going to be Popeye with, Bluto and olive oil. And they couldn't get the licenses worked out in time, so it was quickly changed to like a little Italian guy. Well, I guess Italian by happenstance because the spriters were lazy. But so this little Italian guy and a gorilla and a generic damsel who didn't even have a name at the time. She was just Lady. And then later she had a different name before they finally settled on Pauline. I think Pauline might have actually shown up first as her name in the Game & Watch Donkey Kong release, and she had a different name on the flyers prior to that, actually. Let's see. I should have that somewhere. Louise, yeah, she's called Louise in the initial promotional flyers, and then Pauline in the booklet that came with the actual game when it came out. So yeah, she went through a few name iterations before they settled on Pauline. They probably settled on Pauline just from the popular Perils of Pauline series that was still kind of in the general consciousness at the time, which started out as a series of silent, I don't want to say films because they aren't that long, a serial, a movie serial like back in the day, where you had Pauline, this young heiress who had a lot of money, and a lot of shady guys trying to get it away from her, and she just got up into general hijinks, caught up in things that just got more and more absurd as the serials went on. So, like, one day she'd be involved in a robbery, and then the next day she'd be, like, captured by, say, a giant gorilla in the Congo. Yeah, that was an episode. And then, of course, King Kong was still pretty much the thing in the US as far as, like, movie monsters went. Godzilla really wasn't, like, it was around, but it wasn't huge like it is these days in the US. So King Kong was still very much the thing. The reboots were not that far in the past at the time, and there was still just like they were saying model kits of King Kong. Like, it was still really, really popular. So yeah, just between King Kong and The Perils of Pauline and just sort of the general, like, oh, working class, sort of, there's lots of construction going on and everything, you ended up with the construction site with a big gorilla and Pauline and Jumpman, who would eventually come to be known as Mario. And yeah, that was 35 years ago. So yeah, sweet shit. Thanks, Miyamoto. What else? Oh, recently they announced the NES Classic Edition, which is going to be one of those little plug-and-play consoles that you plug into your television, and it's got a controller, and it's got like a bazillion games on it. This is going to be an actual authorized by Nintendo collection of NES titles. 30 games. A lot of the more popular stuff, like there's Metroid and a couple of the Super Mario Bros. Titles, and Zelda and various other things. But among those 30 titles are Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. and Ice Climber and Mario Bros. So that's 4 of our old school originals right there, as far as the arcade era goes. I've mentioned Ice Climber a couple times. A lot of you should know what that is, just because of Smash Brothers popularizing those characters. The reason it's included in the arcade stuff on DK Girder is because A, the original Versus Ice Climbers, which actually came out before the home console edition, hadn't nailed down the characters of Nana and Popo yet, so it was just kind of generically Mario, just as everything was generically Mario at the time. I actually came across recently a flyer for the Versus Systems arcade games, and it's just a bunch of mugshots of Mario dressed up in different outfits for each of the games. So yeah, Nintendo was just sort of, stuff was generically Mario at the time. But also, it shares some enemies with Donkey Kong Jr. The bird enemies are shared between the titles. So it's a bit of a tenuous connection, but I like to include it in there. Ice Climber's cool. I like it. I know it's not a horribly popular opinion. A lot of people find the game sort of frustrating. But it's nice to be able to include it in this legitimately without having to come up with a, well, I feel like talking about it rule. But yeah, so NES Classics, that's going to be out later in the year for not super cheap, but a decent price point for it. And yeah, that's cool. Let's see, what else was recent? Oh, there was the announced at E3. I know everyone was talking about like Zelda and Pokemon and everything, but who cares about that? The most important thing announced at E3 was the classic Donkey Kong girder amiibo stands. This is what everybody wants to talk about, right? So it's beautiful. You can stack them. They look like the girders. They've got the little like sprite design on them, and they've got little slots on each girder level for 3 amiibos. A lot of the other stands and stuff are just sort of like single stands for a single amiibo. But this one can house 9 at a time, and you can stack them up. How high can you get? So yeah, sweet stuff. Still waiting on that Pauline amiibo. Come on, Nintendo. Let's see, Nintendo Badge Arcade recently put out some new badges for, I believe it was the Game & Watch titles, among them being the original Donkey Kong Game & Watch, so that's pretty sweet. Thanks to one of our forum members over at DK Vine for pointing that out to me. I believe that was, yeah, ZXClon, so thanks, man. He also provided some art, or, well, some screenshots that I'll be putting up on the site later in a news update. So yeah, thanks again for him. I was talking earlier about that Versus arcade flyer I found that has everything generic like Mario, except for one. One of the Versus arcade titles was Golf, which was an arcade version of an NES title, as opposed to the other way around. A lot of the Versus arcade titles came out before their NES counterparts. So, for instance, Versus Ice Climber came out before Ice Climber, and Versus Wrecking Crew came out before Wrecking Crew. Versus just being sort of the blanket title, just like how Super Nintendo games had Super in front of them, or Nintendo 64 games had 64 at the end of them. So Versus wasn't an indicator that it was necessarily multiplayer and head-to-head competition, although like Wrecking Crew did take advantage of that. It was just an indication of the system. So yeah, the Versus system. So Versus Golf was an arcade adaptation of the NES title, which starred ostensibly Mario, like it's Mario on the box art. The in-game sprite looks kind of like Mario, even though it's the wrong color. And the flyers for the arcade game indicate that yes, this is indeed Mario. Well, they also released another version of this game called Versus Ladies Golf. Ladies Golf. With a female golfer. It's pretty much exactly the same game, except it's a woman. And the flyer seems to indicate that this is Pauline. She had appeared playable, sort of, in the Family Basic sort of build your own game with these assets package that had been released in Japan a year or two before. But this was the first sort of legit game that you didn't have to construct yourself that Pauline was playable in. So yeah, props to Pauline. Playable in multiple titles before Peach was even a thing. There you go. Let's see. I guess in the spirit of talking about King Kong earlier, I should mention the upcoming Kong Skull Island film, which is part of the larger legendary Godzilla universe. It'll be releasing at the moment on March 10th, 2017. So yeah, if you're interested in King Kong in the spirit of, like, the spiritual grandfather of our beloved Donkey Kong, I'd encourage you to go check that out. It's going to be, like, set during the Vietnam era. Going to have, like, Tom Hiddleston and Samuel L. Jackson in it. Looks pretty good from the previews I've seen so far. Yeah. Not a whole lot else to talk about, really. As I said, never done this before. Sort of inaugural podcast. I hope to have some co-hosts, guest speakers in future episodes. Maybe some actual sound design and editing. That'd be sweet. But yeah. I hope that me rambling on hasn't bored you too much. And perhaps I'll even put this up. I can talk. Nah, that seems like a good place to stop. Have fun, y'all.